In 2022 Dubai, journalist Daniel is invited to finish an interview that he began nearly 50 years earlier. His subject is Louis de Pointe-du-Lac, plantation owner turned brothel owner turned vampire. Now he lives in a glass penthouse overlooking the desert with a quiet, devout companion named Rashid. Louis wants to tell the story again, and this time he promises it will be the truth. Louis is a successful businessman running brothels in Storyville, navigating racism, class tension, and the expectations of his deeply religious family. His younger brother Paul believes Louis is damned and his mother resents his lifestyle. Louis feels trapped by society, by guilt, and by desire. Then he meets Lestat de Lioncourt. Lestat is a flamboyant, wealthy Frenchman with predatory charm and unsettling intensity. He sees Louis immediately, his anger, his longing, his hunger. Their attraction ignites quickly, erotically charged, and dangerous. When Lestat offers Louis a little drink of his blood, the experience is transcendent, and Louis swears it will never happen again. Then Louis's brother Paul throws himself off the roof. Overcome with grief and guilt, Louis spirals. He confesses his sins in church, and Lestat follows him inside, slaughtering the priest and offering him an escape from his mortal suffering. Louis accepts, and he becomes a vampire. Lestat delights in Louis' transformation, teaching him how to hunt, how to fly, and how to revel in the power. But Louis cannot fully embrace killing. He feeds reluctantly, often choosing animals over humans. He wants rules. Lestat wants indulgence. 6 years pass and they purchase a saloon together and build a lavish life, yet Louis remains conflicted, particularly when he visits his family and nearly loses control around his infant nephew. Tensions grow between the two vampires, and Lestat takes a human lover, Antoinette, in retaliation because Louis reconnects sexually with a childhood friend. Their relationship becomes increasingly volatile: love, obsession, and cruelty. Racial tension in New Orleans explodes when a white businessman attempts to seize Louis' business. Louis retaliates violently, publicly hanging the mutilated body of that businessman. The backlash leads to a fire and destruction in black neighborhoods. Inside a burning boarding house, Louis hears the terrified thoughts of a young girl. He saves her. The girl's name is Claudia, and she is horribly burned. To spare her death, Louis begs Lestat to turn her into a vampire. At first, Lestat resists, but then he ends up doing it for Louis, and Claudia becomes their daughter. At first, she's a wonder. She's clever, bloodthirsty, affectionate, and she bonds deeply with Louis, who can't read her mind because he didn't make her. Lestat did. But Claudia quickly realizes the curse. She will never age. She is a grown mind trapped in a teenage body. Her frustration festers and she falls in love with a human boy named Charlie and accidentally kills him in passion. And Lestat forces her to watch the body burn as her punishment. She begins secretly killing in excess, collecting body parts, and even attempting to create vampires of her own. All of them, though, are failures. A storm washes her hidden corpses into public view, nearly exposing all 3 of them, and because of all this, she ends up leaving New Orleans herself. 7 years later, Claudia returns hardened and determined, and she convinces Louis that they both have to leave Lestat, but Lestat refuses to let them go. He beats Louis nearly to death in a brutal fight. Claudia nurses him back to health, and for years, they live in a cold war, with Lestat attempting reconciliation. Finally, Claudia proposes the only solution they have: kill Lestat, and Louis agrees. Before leaving New Orleans, Lestat throws a lavish Mardi Gras ball, and Claudia secretly poisons a victim, knowing that Lestat will feed from him. He knows of their betrayal, and Antoinette warned him, but Claudia anticipated that too. Lestat drinks, he collapses, and Louis slits his throat. They place his body in a trunk and leave him for dead. In present-day Dubai, Daniel questions the story, suggesting that Louis left Lestat somewhere survivable, surrounded by rats to feed on. Then he reveals the twist. Rashid is not Rashid. He is Armand, an ancient vampire and Louis' great love. Louis and Claudia travel through war-torn Europe after World War II, searching for vampire history. In Romania, they encounter feral vampires and their exhausted maker, and instead of joining them on their travels, she walks straight into fire. Eventually, they reach Paris. There, they're secretly observed by a coven of vampires who stage elaborate murder performances as theater. Their leader is Armand. Louis is drawn to Armand's quiet intelligence and emotional depth. Claudia admires the coven's structure but undergoes hazing, ultimately being cast in a child role she will perform for decades. The coven lives with the 5 great laws, including the prohibition against creating child vampires and killing one's maker. Santiago, an ambitious member, begins circulating Claudia's diaries, which detail Lestat's murder. And at the same time, Louis is struggling with hallucinations of Lestat. Armand and Louis grow closer and they bond over shared histories with Lestat, eventually beginning a romantic relationship. Claudia makes friends with the dressmaker Madeleine, who begs to be turned into a vampire. When Armand refuses to do that, Louis turns Madeleine himself, and this seals their fate. The coven ambushes Louis, Claudia, and Madeleine. They're staged in a grotesque theatrical trial before a human audience. Santiago acts as the ringmaster, and Claudia's diaries are read aloud for everybody to hear. The charges against them? Breaking the 5 laws. Then out of nowhere, Lestat appears, alive. He testifies against them, revealing that Louis demanded Claudia be turned despite knowing the curse. Yet Lestat goes off script, apologizing for past cruelties. Now the verdict of the trial is that Claudia and Madeleine are condemned to death by sunlight. Louis is sentenced to banishment, but is secretly imprisoned in a coffin filled with gravel, left to starve. And at the end of that trial, Claudia and Madeleine burn in front of everybody. Armand eventually frees Louis, and Louis sets the entire theater and all the vampires on fire. He reunites with Armand and later meets Lestat again in Magnus's old lair, but instead of killing Lestat physically, Louis chooses Armand. In 1973 San Francisco, Daniel originally interviewed Louis, and during that time, Armand manipulated both of them, altering memories after Louis attempted suicide by sunlight during a massive argument. And in the present, Daniel reveals the final truth that he learned during this whole interview. Armand directed the Paris trial, and it was actually Lestat who saved Louis from execution, not Armand. And Louis confronts Armand, devastated by decades of manipulation. He ends up leaving. Louis returns to New Orleans, he reunites with Lestat, and they reconcile, not erasing their past, but acknowledging it. Months later, Daniel, now turned into a vampire by Armand, publishes the interview as a bestseller, although the world dismisses it all as fiction. Back in Dubai, Louis hears the psychic fury of vampires worldwide, enraged that he exposed their existence in the interview. He stands calmly in the glass tower and dares them to come for him. Thank you so much for watching my recap of Interview with the Vampire Seasons 1 and 2. Let me know in the comments what recap you want to see next. Thanks again for watching, and I'm going to catch you in the next video.